Did Iran really strike 85 U.S. military installations in one night? Or are we watching the first minutes of a much bigger deception? Because when sirens echo across the Gulf before the facts arrive, panic spreads faster than the missiles ever could. If you want sharp breakdowns without the shouting, tap, like, subscribe, and share this with the one friend who always asks, what is really going on here? Tonight's story sounds like the kind of headline that makes people freeze for a second and stare at their phone. Iran, 85 U.S. military installations. Sirens sounding across Bahrain and Kuwait. Words like that do not land softly. They hit all at once. They create one instant feeling. This is getting out of control. But here's the first thing we need to do before fear does our thinking for us. Slow down. Not because the situation is small, not because the danger is fake, but because in moments like this, speed can make lies feel solid. Early reports are always messy. Claims arrive first. Proof arrives later. Emotion arrives even earlier than both. And that is exactly why this story matters. Because even if only part of the headline is true, the region may have just crossed into a completely different phase of confrontation. And if the full claim is true, then this is not a routine flare-up. It is a direct challenge to American military power. The number is what pulls everyone in. 85. It sounds huge because it is huge. It sounds organized because it would have to be. You do not throw a number like that into the world by accident. It is either a description of a major operation or a deliberate act of psychological warfare. Either way, it is meant to send a message. That message is simple. We can reach you. We can shake your bases. We can force the world to react. And the world does react because Bahrain and Kuwait are not random places on a map. They are deeply tied to the American military footprint. Bahrain hosts the U.S. Fifth Fleet, one of the most important naval commands in the region. Kuwait has long served as a major logistics hub. When alarms go off there, people do not hear a local problem. They hear the possibility of a wider war. Sirens are more than noise. They are signals that ordinary life has been interrupted by the possibility of violence. Somewhere, a family stops talking at the dinner table. Somewhere, a soldier drops whatever he is holding and looks toward the sky. Somewhere, a child asks a parent if this is real. And in those moments, truth has not fully arrived yet. Only fear has. So let us rebuild this carefully. The claim came after a chain of escalation that was already dangerous. Reports said commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz had been attacked. Then came U.S. strikes on Iranian targets. Then came Iran's answer, with the claim that American-linked military sites in Gulf states had been targeted. That is the latter as we understand it right now. Vessel attacks, retaliation, counter-retaliation, and every rung on that ladder feels steeper than the one before it. The Strait of Hormuz is the reason the whole world pays attention. It is one of the most critical choke points in the global economy. A huge share of the world's oil moves through that narrow waterway. If shipping there is threatened, energy markets react almost instantly. Oil traders react, governments react, investors react, airlines react. Consumers eventually react too, usually at the gas pump, in shipping costs, and in prices that rise far away from the Gulf. That is one reason stories like this create such intense panic. The battlefield is regional. The consequences are global. But there is another layer, and it is even more dangerous. This is not only about oil, it is about credibility. For the United States, military presence in the Gulf is supposed to do two things at once. It protects routes, partners, and assets. And it sends a constant message of deterrence. Do not push this too far. Do not test the system. Do not assume the response will be weak. For Iran, challenging that presence can also do two things. It can answer an attack, and it can prove that American power, while massive, is not untouchable. That matters, because regimes under pressure often rely on symbolism almost as much as strategy. Sometimes the image of resistance is part of the weapon, and that is what makes the claim of 85 targets so explosive. Even before we know the full damage, the number itself becomes a battlefield. If you say 85, you are not just talking about impact sites. You are shaping psychology. You are telling your own people that you struck back hard. You are telling your enemies that their shield has holes. You are telling the region that this confrontation is no longer distant or abstract. That is how narratives become part of war. Now let us talk about what often gets lost in the first rush of coverage. Not every target is equal. A missile storage area is not the same as a command center. A radar site is not the same as family housing. A logistics compound is not the same as a runway. And a targeted installation does not automatically mean destroyed installation. In the language of conflict, those are very different things. That distinction matters because of the oldest tricks in military messaging. Hit can sound like destroyed. Targeted can sound like obliterated. Alert can sound like mass casualties. But the actual truth may be narrower or stranger or more limited than the first wave of panic suggests. Still, limited does not mean harmless. If Iran launched a coordinated operation, then something important has already changed. The threshold moved. A line that once felt too dangerous to cross now looks crossable. Once that happens, the next decision gets easier. That is how escalation works in the real world. It does not always begin with a dramatic declaration. Often it begins with a new normal that nobody accepts out loud, but everybody starts acting around. Yesterday, this would have sounded unthinkable. Today, people are debating blast patterns, casualties, and response options. That is how fast history moves when the brakes fail. And there is one more reason the number 85 has such emotional force. It sounds symmetrical, it sounds calculated. If earlier U.S. operations involved dozens of targets, then 85 installations sounds like a reply. Not just revenge, messaging. A mirror held up on purpose. That kind of symmetry is not random. It tells us this was meant to be read, repeated, and remembered. Now ask yourself a harder question. What if the people behind the claim knew that even partial success would be enough? What if they did not need to destroy everything? What if they only needed sirens, confusion, headlines, and uncertainty? In that case, the attack is physical, but also informational. The panic becomes part of the payload, and honestly, that may be the most modern part of this crisis. Wars today do not begin only with explosions. They begin with clips, alerts, anonymous posts, statements, and half-confirmed footage. Governments race to control the first version of the story. The first casualty is not only truth, it is proportion. Because the moment people hear 85 U.S. military installations, they are not thinking in clean categories. They imagine the worst picture. Fire everywhere, bases collapsing, regional war already underway. The human mind fills gaps with fear. But governments fill gaps with strategy. Iran has reasons to sound strong. The United States has reasons to stay careful. Gulf states have reasons to condemn any violation of their sovereignty while also trying not to trigger an uncontrollable spiral. Every actor is speaking to several audiences at once: domestic, military, allied governments, financial markets, and adversaries. That is why silence can be as meaningful as speech. If Washington is slow to confirm details, that does not mean the claim is false. It can mean assessments are ongoing. It can mean officials are trying to verify what response options still preserve room to maneuver. Governments do not like making major military statements with incomplete facts, when every word can lock them into a response. And yet, delay creates its own danger. In the vacuum, the boldest narrative wins the first round. So people watching from outside the region end up trapped between two instincts. One instinct says, do not overreact. The other says, if this is real, underreacting is foolish. That tension is what makes crises like this so hard to read. Now zoom out. If you're still with me, you already know this story is bigger than one headline. Hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who values clarity when the news gets loud. This is not happening in a calm world. Global tensions are already stretched. Supply chains are fragile. Energy markets are nervous. Great powers are already competing in multiple regions. Elections, sanctions, proxy wars, and military signaling have pushed the system. One more shock can travel a long way, very fast. That means the question is not only what was hit, the question is, what does each side believe it must do next to avoid looking weak? That is the question that has started wars. No leader wants to look passive after a strike. No military wants its deterrence questioned. No regime wants to appear unable to answer an attack on its own territory. Pride becomes policy. Optics become strategy. Then strategy begins to serve emotion. That is the moment things become truly dangerous. Because once both sides start acting to protect reputation, the room for compromise gets smaller, not impossible, just smaller. And this is where Bahrain and Kuwait matter in a deeper way. If attacks truly reached military sites on their soil, this is not a US-Iran issue. It becomes a sovereignty issue for the Gulf states themselves. A confrontation between two adversaries becomes something larger, a regional security crisis with allies dragged closer to the center. That changes the diplomatic map. Countries that prefer quiet balancing suddenly face public pressure to respond. Defense agreements become more relevant. Air defenses become more visible. Back-channel diplomacy becomes urgent. Now, let us talk about the human side. Geopolitics can become cold very fast. Behind every phrase like military installation are actual people. Not just commanders, not just soldiers. Mechanics, cooks, guards, drivers, medical staff, contractors, families nearby, local workers, people on night shift, people texting home, people who thought they were stationed in a tense region, not a war. And behind every siren is a short, brutal question: where do I go right now? This is why even a strike with limited physical damage can have enormous psychological power. If you can make people feel exposed inside the system that was supposed to protect them, you have changed something important. Morale changes, readiness changes, command decisions change, political pressure changes. That is true for the United States. It is also true for partners in the region. Gulf capitals have lived with fear for years. They are wealthy, strategic, close to shipping lanes, and deeply exposed if a regional war expands. They know that once missiles begin moving, maps stop feeling theoretical. So what happens next? There are usually three broad paths in moments like this, and none of them are comfortable. The first path is controlled de-escalation. Public anger stays high, but private communication opens fast. Intermediaries move. Oman, European governments, or other quiet channels help both sides send messages without losing face. Each side claims success. Each side warns the other not to go further. The headline is cool, but the structure remains, waiting for the next spark. That is the best realistic outcome. The second path is contained military escalation. One side answers with another strike, but both try to keep the conflict inside a limited box. Specific assets, specific zones, specific windows. This is the path leaders often convince themselves they can manage. They believe they can punish without unleashing disaster. Sometimes they are right. Sometimes they are catastrophically wrong. Because the third path is expansion through miscalculation. A strike lands where it was not supposed to land. Casualties are higher than expected. A missile hits a symbolic site. A partner state gets pulled in. A proxy group opens another front. Shipping gets disrupted more broadly. Insurance costs jump. Oil surges. Financial markets tremble. Suddenly the crisis is no longer about one night or one headline. It becomes a chain reaction. And chain reactions are hard to stop because nobody feels responsible for the whole thing. Each player sees only the move in front of them. This is why the phrase World War III spreads so fast online. It captures fear in 3 words. It feels huge and dramatic. But real danger is usually less cinematic and more mechanical. It is not one giant switch flipping all at once. It is a sequence of decisions, retaliations, misread signals, wounded pride, false certainty, and shrinking options. That does not make it less dangerous. It makes it more dangerous. Because people are prepared for obvious madness. They are less prepared for disciplined escalation that slowly outruns the people directing it. There is also a deeper strategic question hiding under the noise. Why would Iran take a risk this large? One answer is deterrence by shock. If Iran believes it has been cornered, a response can reestablish fear. The logic is harsh, but simple. If they think hitting us is cheap, make it feel expensive. Another answer is domestic legitimacy. Governments under pressure need to project strength outward to maintain confidence inward. A forceful response tells supporters that the leadership is not passive. It tells rivals at home that the state can still act. A third answer is regional signaling. Iran may want every Gulf capital to think twice about what further escalation could cost. But every one of those possible motives runs into the same brutal problem. The United States has motives it cannot abandon. America cannot comfortably absorb a strike on forces or facilities tied to its regional posture and simply move on. Not because every response is wise, but because great powers depend heavily on perception. If deterrence looks weak, adversaries notice, allies notice, markets notice, domestic critics notice. And once credibility starts to erode, restoring it becomes more expensive. That is the trap. Both sides may believe escalation is necessary to restore deterrence. Both sides may see restraint as weakness. Both sides may believe the other only understands force. Once those beliefs harden, diplomacy sounds like surrender. That is when history gets dark. And this is where we need to be brutally honest. Decisions are made without perfect information. They are seeing radar tracks, intelligence summaries, damage reports, political pressure, and public panic all at once. They are trying to act strong without acting blind. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes fear wears the mask of clarity. The public often imagines war rooms as places of total control. In reality, they are places of incomplete pictures and high-stakes judgment. That matters because a lot of people are asking, is this already the beginning of a bigger war? The honest answer is, not necessarily. But events like this create the architecture for one. They create new precedents, new anxieties, new red lines, new expectations. Once military bases and partner states are part of the active confrontation, every next move becomes more politically loaded. And once the global economy starts pricing in risk, even countries that want distance get dragged closer by necessity. Think about energy for a moment. If shipping through the Gulf becomes persistently threatened, the consequences spread far beyond military circles. Fuel prices rise, transport costs rise, insurance costs rise, food distribution gets more expensive, inflation pressure returns everywhere. This is why a night of sirens in Bahrain or Kuwait does not stay a local story for long. It becomes a global stress signal. People in the region understand that instinctively. They have lived close to the fault line for years. They know that calm can be temporary. They know that airports can stay open while fear grows under the surface. That emotional contradiction is one of the hardest things to understand. Life can look normal and fragile at the same time. If this breakdown is helping, you subscribe, hit like, and send this video to someone who is tired of dramatic headlines. A lot of people online are going to sell certainty tonight. Be careful with those voices. Accuracy is expensive. The claim of 85 U.S. military installations being struck is large enough to represent a major operation or a major information campaign. And then there is the question no one likes. What if nobody knows how to stop acting like they are approaching war? States do not always choose catastrophe. Sometimes they drift toward it because every short-term move seems rational from inside the moment. Retaliate now so you're not seen as weak. Signal strength now so you deter later. Except the next strike often does come. This is why escalation can feel intelligent at every step and still produce disaster overall. The real question is one of restraint. Once restraint disappears, raw capability takes over. The United States has overwhelming conventional power. Iran has geography and missile forces. A full regional war may still be avoidable. But if leaders stop respecting the cost of miscalculation, probability can change very quickly. The right response is neither hysteria nor denial. It is disciplined attention. Watch what gets confirmed. Watch who changes language. Also watch the silences. If key governments delay specifics, those details can tell you as much as the speeches do. Remember the people closest to the danger. For them, this is not content. It is atmosphere. It is sleep lost. The confrontation has moved into a more dangerous zone. We are watching a contest over deterrence, credibility, fear, and retaliation. The next few decisions matter more than the last few headlines. A leader deciding whether to pause or prove a point. History often turns on choices that look small inside the room and enormous outside it. The world changes when a threshold breaks. We should absolutely understand the seriousness of what this could become. The margin for error gets terrifyingly thin. The smartest thing any of us can do is stay alert, stay skeptical, and keep watching the facts harder than we watch the fear. What happens next may decide whether this was a terrifying night or the opening chapter of something the world will regret for years. Before we say the world has changed forever, we need to watch the next move with our eyes open. That is why the noise matters. Sometimes the most dangerous moment is the response that comes after everyone believes they have no choice.